Thank you very much. I am Allen Eskens. I'm an author. I've been an author, like Susie said, since 2014 when my first novel was published. In that year, 2014, when I realized I was going to be a published author, I had never been to a book event. I'd never been to an author talk. I'd never listened to someone like myself, an author, say things. And I didn't know what I would be saying when I had my turn, so I started going to these author events and listening to what the authors would talk about. And invariably, they would talk about what it was that started them down this path that led them to become a writer. And they would say things like, I knew I'd be a writer from my early ages. I wrote my first short story in 3rd grade, or I spent all my time in libraries reading books. And the more I listened to these authors, the more I realized that my life wasn't like theirs. So I went in search of what was it that led me to be a writer. And my search took me back to my hometown of Jefferson City, Missouri, to a bin in my mother's closet where she kept my school memorabilia. And in that bin, I found what I believe is the reason I'm a writer today. And I found it on my 1st grade report card. On my 1st grade report card, on the back of it, where my parents have to sign, my teacher, Sister Ronald Marie, wrote a little note to my parents. She wrote, "Alan dreams too much when work is to be done in school." And that's why I'm a writer today. I love daydreaming. I've always loved daydreaming. It was my favorite part of school. You put me anywhere near a window, I'd look out, I'd see some reflective thing, and I would be gone. And because of that and a lot of other things, I was not a very good student. I didn't get good grades. I did not come close to excelling, but I was okay with that. I come from a blue-collar background. My father was a Nebraska farmer who moved to Missouri and fell in love with hanging sheetrock, so he started a drywall company. And from my earliest memories, I worked for his drywall company. And I always figured that when I got out of school, I was going to be a drywaller or in construction of some sort. And I really didn't need good grades for that, so I didn't care and I didn't try, and I succeeded at not getting good grades. But then something happened to change the course of my life, and it happened because of a teacher. I know we have some teachers in the audience, if you could raise your hands. Thank you for your service. And on behalf of students like myself, I apologize. So when I was in 5th grade, my 5th grade teacher changed my life, and she got me into the school play. Now when I say she got me into the school play, I didn't even know the school was putting on a play. And to be in the play, you had to be a 6th, 7th, or 8th grader. I was a 5th grader, so I wasn't even eligible. But my teacher went to the director of the play and got special permission from me to audition. And then she came and told me about this play they were doing and told me I had an audition. So I auditioned and I got a part in the play, and I got the best part in the whole play, which wasn't the lead. I only had 2 scenes. But I got to be the only character who got to say a cuss word. I played a prisoner, and in my scene, they were going to hang me, and there was this priest trying to get me to confess my sins. And I'm sitting backwards in this chair looking out over the audience, and the first performance was grades 1 through 4, so the little kids. And I'm looking angry because they're going to hang me. And this priest says his lines, "Are you sure you won't confess your sins?" And I said, "Yes, I'm sure, damn it, go away." And when I said damn it, those little kids, their eyes popped, and I became a celebrity. Everybody knew me. And I thought, I like this acting thing. But my school didn't put on any more plays. And so I went back to my old ways of being a very poor student. And I actually went overboard. I was one of those kids that you hated to have in your class. I was, my 8th grade year, the record holder for the most written punishments. Thank you. I was a kid who, for 8th grade graduation, me and my friends went out and had a kegger. We bought a keg. We had a friend who bought a keg. Went out to Kevin Maxey's farm and got drunk. That's who I was when I went into high school. I was so apathetic. I did not like being a student. I didn't want to be there. And I actually vowed that I wasn't going to do anything extracurricular. I was just going to do my 4 years of high school and be done. Well, my freshman year, the spring, my school put on a play. And it was Oklahoma. And me and my best friend were talking about this play, and I told him about this play I did in 5th grade and how much fun it was. And somehow by the end of that conversation, we had double dog dared each other to try out for Oklahoma. And we auditioned, and we both got in it, and it was glorious. It was so much fun. And the really cool thing about high school plays versus grade school plays is that at the end of the performance, that last curtain comes down in the high school play, and everybody's really emotional, and everybody's going around hugging everybody. And here I am, this geeky freshman, getting hugged by these beautiful junior and senior women. And I'm thinking, why would you play football when you can do this? So I became a theater person. I found something that I was passionate about. And now I wanted to go to school. I wanted to be there, and I loved it. But I was still this kid who believed that I wasn't smart enough to go anywhere beyond high school. I was just going to be, high school, then out to construction. But as my senior year approached, I started asking myself, what if? Because in my theater friends, I was hanging around these kids who were going to go to college. Now, nobody in my family had ever gone to college. It wasn't something we talked about at the dinner table. But I just thought, what if? If I went to college, if nothing else, I could do theater for a couple more years before they figured out that I wasn't supposed to be there. So my senior year, I buckled down. I tried really hard. I got my GPA up to a solid 2.5. But I did really well on the ACT somehow, and I got into the University of Iowa. Well, I went to the University of Iowa as a theater major. My plan was I was going to do 2 years of theater and study everything I could that was theater related, take the classes they made me take. But then after that 2 years, I was going to get on a bus, I was going to go to New York City, and I was going to spend the rest of my life in New York City as an actor. I am not in New York City. As that 2 years was approaching, I sprained my ankle really badly and realized that I wasn't going to be able to do what I wanted to do as an actor because my forte at that point was dance. But I was having fun at college, so I started looking around for what I could do to keep myself in college. Now, I'm really bad at math, so I thought I'll do something that's word-based. I switched my degree to journalism, finished my degree in journalism, and for the first time in my life, I was actually trying to be a student. I was studying for tests, I was turning in homework, I was reading assignments, and I was getting almost straight A's. And I thought, what would it have been like if I'd tried from the very beginning? And really, with nothing more than that as a motivation, I went to law school. I never really wanted to be a lawyer, but I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to challenge myself. So I go to law school, and I excelled in law school. I have a wonderful resume from my law school years. And I get out of law school, graduated in December of 1991, passed the bar in spring of 1992. And that summer, I have a job. I'm working as a judicial law clerk. And I realized something important in my life is missing. And what was missing was that passion I had discovered in theater. Now, I had no skills to go back into theater at this point, but I thought, what could I do to try and scratch that creative itch? So I sat down and I started writing a short story. And I wrote the short story about a 15-year-old boy. I liked the story, but I had never taken a creative writing class. So I had no idea if the story was any good or not. So I bought a book on writing technique, and I read that book. And as I read the book, I realized there's a lot to this writing thing that I didn't know about. And I became intrigued, and I bought another book. And I started reading more about writing technique and craft. And as I was reading these books, I was adding to this story and making it from a short story into a chapter in a larger journey. And after a while, I thought, well, I need to start getting feedback to see if what I'm doing is right. So I started taking classes. The Iowa Summer Writers Festival has a wonderful class system in the summer. I took a lot of classes there. Minneapolis has the Loft Literary Center. Took a lot of classes there. I eventually entered the MFA program at Minnesota State University, Mankato, which is where I live. And I got 3/4 of an MFA degree. And I did this for 20 years. I read, I practiced, I wrote. And this manuscript that I started in 1992, I worked on it for 20 years. And after 20 years, I looked at that manuscript and I said to myself, it's not ready. And I didn't know why. So I put it aside and decided I'm going to write another manuscript. And the reason I did this is because during the course of that 20 years, I came to understand something about myself. I came to understand that I am a writer. There's a famous quote in Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. In Letters to a Young Poet, the young poet asks, "How do I know if I'm a writer?" And Rilke answers, "Ask yourself in your most solemn moments, must I write? If the answer to that is yes, then you are a writer, and you should conform your life accordingly." So here I am practicing law, raising a family, I have a law firm, I'm the senior partner, but in my heart, I knew that I was a writer. So when that 20 years was up and I put that first manuscript aside, I was going to write another manuscript because I was a writer. I enjoyed it. That's what I did for fun. That's what brought me joy. So I wrote this second manuscript, and when I finished it, I thought, I think this one's ready. I think this one's good enough to get published. So I started to try and get an agent, sending out query letters, and I started getting rejection letters. And to distract myself from these rejection letters, I started writing yet another manuscript because I'm a writer. About the time I was finishing the first draft of that third manuscript, I got an agent for the first one, or for the second one, excuse me, my first published novel, The Life We Bury. So I get an agent, and within a few weeks, I have a contract for my first novel to be published, The Life We Bury. If you haven't read it, it's a story of a young man who is running away from home to go to college. He gets an assignment to interview somebody and write their life story. So he goes to a nursing home because he doesn't know anybody in the Twin Cities. And at this nursing home, he meets a man named Carl, who is dying of cancer, who is a Vietnam vet, but who also spent 30 years in prison for murder. And through this assignment, through these interviews, Joe, my protagonist, is pulled into this mystery, this 30-year-old mystery of Carl Iverson. But it's also the story of Joe wanting to run away from home to go to college and leave behind his responsibility for his younger autistic brother and the struggles he has with guilt over that decision. He keeps getting pulled back into his hometown of Austin, Minnesota to deal with his dysfunctional mother and protect his brother. So I get a publishing contract for this one. Well, at that point, I had this third manuscript that I've been working on, and I took that to my agent. And what I did was, because I liked the characters that I'd created in The Life We Bury, I wanted to tell stories about secondary characters. So in The Life We Bury, there is a homicide detective. He's a minor character, but his name is Max Rupert, and I wanted to tell a story about him. So I wrote a story. It's a good brother, bad brother story where he's the good brother. His younger brother is also a detective, and he's the bad brother. And I took that to my agent, and I said, I have a book here from Max Rupert, and what I want to do is I want to get a 3-book deal. And the reason I wanted a 3-book deal was because I've been reading online about other authors getting 3-book deals, and I thought, that sounds really cool. And my agent says, okay, what are the other 2 books about? And I said, I'll get back to you. Now, one of the things that I learned in studying writing is a thing called the hero's journey. The hero's journey, in summation, is a person, a protagonist, begins a story a certain way. They see themselves, they see the world a certain way. Something happens to change them, to set them on a journey, and that journey is an ever-increasing set of obstacles that this person has to overcome. And because of that journey, the crucible that they go through changes them, and at the end of the novel, or the story, they see themselves differently and see the world differently. So that's your hero's journey. And I love that arc when I write stories. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to create a hero's journey that took place over 3 novels. So Max Rupert, in The Guise of Another, the good brother, bad brother story, he's the good brother. He's a man with a moral compass. He's a man who follows the rules. In the second book, The Heavens May Fall, Max Rupert begins to question that role. He's faced with this decision, do I follow the rules or do I follow my heart? Now, the title, The Heavens May Fall, comes from a legal adage, let justice be done though the heavens may fall. And it stands for the proposition that if you have a decision, a dilemma, do I do what the rules say or do I do what I believe is right? You should always do what you believe to be right and let the heavens fall where they may. So Max makes the decision to step out of that role of Boy Scout and take some things on that are outside the rules. And that leads to the third book of the arc, which is a book called The Deep Dark Descending. And that is Max facing his darkest demons. Because of that decision to step out of his moral compass, it brings him to a point where he has a decision to make. This is a revenge novel. He needs to decide, first of all, he catches a man that Max believes killed his wife. And that's in the first opening paragraph of the novel. Now the question is, what does he do with that man? And it's a decision between, do I do justice or do I do vengeance? And that's what this book is about, him struggling with that demon. So I took that idea to my agent. My agent took it to my publisher. My publisher said, love it, signed me up for a 3-book deal. And so I had 3 books on top of the Library before the Library even hit store shelves. So the Library comes out, 2014. It came out to wonderful reviews, nominated for 7 different awards, won 3 of them. It was on the USA Today bestsellers list for 15 weeks, published in 26 languages now. And because it came out to such fanfare, my publisher came to me right away and said, we would like you to do a sequel to the Library. And I was in the middle of writing that Max Rupert trilogy. And I said, well, I got to finish this trilogy. And they said, put that aside and do the sequel. I said, well, here's the real problem. I have a great idea for a sequel. However, Joe Talbot is a college student in the Library. I don't want to write about Joe Talbot solving another crime as a college student. I need to have him grow up. I want him to be 5 years older when I write the sequel, so I need to wait 5 years and then I'll write the sequel. And my publisher said, this is fiction, you know. But this goes back to my daydreaming. These characters, they live in my head. They grow as I write stories. So as I write stories, for example, in the Library, Joe has a girlfriend named Lila. In The Heavens May Fall, it's a story about Max Rupert, who believing that this man killed this man's wife. And one of Max Rupert's best friends, a guy named Bodie Sandin, who is also a character in the Library, he's a law professor, he comes out of retirement to defend this man. So it pits Max against Bodie. They're friends at the beginning of the novel, and that tension creates one of the legs of the stools of the novel. But I also have Lila, the girlfriend from the Library. She's in law school in this book. She's grown up a couple of years. She's in law school. She's now working as a law clerk for Bodie during this case. In the sequel, The Shadows We Hide, she's just graduated law school and she's studying for the bar exam. So my characters, they grow and mature in my head, and then I write the stories as they come out. So I wrote the trilogy first. I stuck to my guns. Wrote The Shadows We Hide, which was a sequel. And it's about, in the Library, Joe, I tell you that he's named after his father, but he's never met his father. And so this book begins with Joe working for the Associated Press as a reporter. He's out of college. And he sees a press release about a man named Joseph Talbot who was found dead in southern Minnesota. Now Joe has to ask himself, is this my father? And if so, who was he? What kind of guy was he? And what happened to him? And that starts the story for that. Meanwhile, while I'm writing all these novels, there's that story that I started back in 1992 about that 15-year-old boy. And that's been just eating at me. You know, finish me, come back and finish me. So when I finished The Shadows We Hide, I went back to that story. And having learned so much by writing those other 5 novels, I was able to look at that story that I worked on for 20 years and say, here's what was wrong with it. And basically what I did was I started from scratch. I had multiple versions of that manuscript in my drawer. I'd written it in third person, I wrote it in first person, I wrote it in, looking back and present tense. And when it came time to pull it out of the drawer, I didn't even pull it out. I didn't look at it. I outlined it from the beginning as if I'd never written this story, and I wrote it from beginning to end as if I'd never written it before. Now, every now and again, I would go back and find passages that I remembered in the earlier manuscripts that I thought, I like that description, I'm going to try and find that and pull it forward. In the end, though, only about 15% of the original manuscript made it into the published version. It had changed that much, but really the story and the characters hadn't changed. I had changed as a writer. And so it's a very different story in terms of how it's written, but it's really the same story in terms of the characters and the plot. It is the story of a 15-year-old boy in 1976 His name is Bodhi Sandin. Now, I mentioned Bodhi Sandin earlier. In my other novels, Bodhi Sandin is a law professor in present day. So this boy in 1976 grows up to be Bodhi Sandin, the law professor. And I did that because I had already written this story about this 15-year-old boy. And when I was writing The Life of Barry, I realized that this law professor character that I was writing and this 15-year-old boy that I'd already written about were really aspects of who I was at 15 and who I became after going to school. And so that's how Bodhi Sandin became the law professor. But I already had Bodhi Sandin, the 15-year-old boy, in existence. And Bodhi Sandin, the 15-year-old boy, is a kid who he's very unhappy with his world. He lives on a dead-end gravel road in a town called Jessup, Missouri. He lives with his widowed mother. His mother has never quite gotten over the death of his father 10 years earlier. And there's this coldness in the house because of that. And the mother has her own journey in this novel as well. She needs to have a journey. And next door to Bodhi, there's an old man, he's not much older than me, this older guy who has lived next door to Bodhi since Bodhi's earliest memories. And this man's name is Hoke Gardner. And Hoke has a dark secret. And over the course of the summer that this novel takes place, Bodhi comes to learn about that secret. And Hoke has a journey. At the end of the road, there is, of all things, a drywall company where Bodhi and his mother work. The man who owns that drywall company, he's got his own journey. And that's all the people that live on this dead-end gravel road, but there is an empty house across the road from where Bodhi and his mother live. It's a beautiful Victorian house, a house that once belonged to the person that owned all this land. The house has been sitting empty for 5 years since the last owner passed away. And the story begins with that house being sold. And the house is sold to a black family. Now, Bodhi, everybody in his world is white. Everybody that he grew up with is white. He has a belief that he doesn't have a prejudicial bone in his body. When this family moves in across the road, they have a son named Thomas. Bodhi and Thomas eventually become friends. And in doing so, Bodhi starts to see the world through the eyes of his friend Thomas. And he starts to see how Bodhi's notions of us and them were really based in prejudice. Even though he believed in his heart he wasn't a prejudicial person, it was a subconscious prejudice. And that is the journey that Bodhi has to take during the course of this novel. The novel came out in November of last year. It is literally the book I became a writer to write. I mean, this is the story that I was working on for 20 years as I was studying writing, and everything I was doing when I was studying writing was to try and make this better. I am so pleased it came out. It's gotten some terrific reviews, like over-the-top reviews. There's one reviewer, New York Journal, who said it's like the best thing since To Kill a Mockingbird. I love To Kill a Mockingbird, so that is crazy. But the reviews have been just full force wonderful for this book, and I'm glad because this is really the book that I became a writer to write. It is a special book for me, but it is one of 6 books that I've written, and different people find different joys in different books. So there are some people that like The Life of Barry, they say that's my best book. Others say Nothing More Dangerous is. My former publicist, she liked The Guise of Another best. So you bring to a book what you have in your own life and your own subjective notions. But for me, Nothing More Dangerous is my favorite book. And the title, I draw my titles from the themes of my novels. So for example, The Life We Bury is a metaphor for people who are trying to leave something about themselves behind. Carl, the man in the nursing home, he's trying to leave behind what happened to him in his past. Joe is trying to leave his brother behind. Lila is trying to leave something behind. They're trying to move away from something that was very traumatic in their lives. And so that's where The Life of Barry came from. Nothing More Dangerous actually comes from a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., in which he says, "There's nothing in all the world more dangerous than sincere ignorance." So that, to me, encapsulates the theme. It is who Bodhi is. He is a kid who is sincere in his good-hearted belief that he is not prejudiced, even though he is. So I'm going to take just a moment to read just a little bit, if I can find my glasses, and then I'm going to open this up to question and answer. I may not be able to find what I want to read. Okay. This takes place later on in the novel, about 2/3 of the way through. Bodhi and his friend Thomas were walking down a dirt road, and a pickup truck comes by, that truck on the cover, and a man who is in the passenger seat of that truck leans out, he's wearing a mask, and swings a broomstick at the boys, hitting Bodhi. And this is Bodhi telling that story to his neighbor Hoke. After supper, Mom went home and I stayed behind to help Thomas with the dishes. Mom's idea, not mine. After dishes, I said my goodbyes. Outside on the western horizon, the tail end of a storm broke above the hills, and the setting sun exploded against the clouds in waves of gold and purple and red. As I took a moment to admire the colors, I heard the screech of Hoke's front door. Figuring he probably hadn't heard all about what happened, I made my way over to tell him about the attack, laying the story out in great detail because Hoke, more than anyone I knew, appreciated the small details. He studied my expression during most of the retelling, but toward the end, he let his gaze wander out to the woods, looking at nothing in particular, just slowly moving his head from side to side. When I finished, he gave a sigh and said, "I'm sorry, Bodhi." "Sorry for what?" I said. "You didn't do nothing." "I should have warned you about the danger," he said. "Remember when we talked about folks trying to feel like they belong by putting others down, us versus them?" "Yeah?" "Well, it runs much deeper than that." Hoke leaned back in his chair, fixing his eyes on something far away, like he always did when he was about to go deep. "In a perfect world, ignorant notions should die a quick death. A thing like racism, if it can't find a kindred spirit, it's like a dog barking at a stone. But if you can find just one other person who thinks like you, well, even the most irrational belief can grow roots. Small-minded people feed off each other, and before you know it, you have mobs and you have burning crosses and lynchings. But we didn't do nothing to them. They had no cause to come after us the way they did. Men like that, they don't need much in the way of cause. All it takes is a couple guys angry over something, looking for someone to blame. It's like Dr. King said, nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance. Sometimes I think that's the truest thing a man's ever said." And he was swinging for my head like he wanted to kill me. "Bodhi, you ever heard of a boy named Emmett Till? Is he from Jessup?" "No. Emmett Till was a black kid from Chicago. He was 14 back in 1955 when he took a trip down to visit some relatives in Mississippi. While he was there, he talked to a white woman. Not long after that, a couple good old boys with guns took Emmett from his uncle's house. Just took him. 3 days later, they found the boy's body in a river with a cotton gin fan tied around his neck. Jesus. And all because they didn't like the way he talked to a white woman. But that was a long time ago, before he was even born. They put a stop to all that by passing those civil rights laws. Bodhi, the men who beat and murdered those folks for all those years, do you think they simply disappeared because someone passed a law?" A quiet sadness wrapped around Hoke's words as he spoke, as though he held himself responsible for the sins of people who came before him. "Do you think those folks just figured out that they were wrong and went home?" "No, but things are different now, ain't they?" "I wish to God they were. But that stuff still happens. Maybe not in the way it happened to Emmett Till, but it's out there. Always will be." "Not always. People change." "People can change if they want to, but the sad truth is, humans are hardwired to be prejudiced. It's passed down from ancestors who were just trying to figure out what to fear and what to hunt. We learn to separate things into good and bad, and Well, that particular human frailty is alive and well in all of us. It's not a matter of if we have prejudices. We do. It's a matter of understanding those instincts and fighting against them. So that is, thank you. So that is kind of the encapsulation of how this book came to be. When I was first writing that short story about that 15-year-old boy, really I was doing nothing more than just writing a short story about a kid who likes to daydream. Because I didn't understand the need for the hero's journey. And once I realized how important the hero's journey was to a story, it was very easy for me to understand that was going to be this kid's journey. It is a book that it really mirrors my own changing from when I was 15 to when I was an adult, coming to understand that kid who I was at 15, even though I was a good-hearted kid and I believed that I wasn't prejudiced, I was. And the point of the book, of writing the book, was to try and get people to ask themselves, I think I'm not prejudiced, but could I be? So it is a story with a lot of moving parts. It's a story of friendship. It's a mystery. There's a missing woman named Lida Poe. It's a story of redemption, and it's a good book. So I'm going to right now just and one last statement. I am still writing books. My next book will be Lila's story. So I'm writing her story. She's going to have her own book. I took a year off, so my next book will not be out this year, but it'll be out 2021. I don't want to say a title because if the title changes, people will email me from watching this video and say, where's this book? Because when The Guise of Another was first being under contract, it had a different title, and I posted some stuff about this book with this other title, and people will see that online and say, well, I'm looking for In the Path of the Beast. Where's that one at? It's like, oh, it's there. So anyway, changing this from a monologue into a dialogue, opening up for questions and answers. Yes, you in the back there.
So first of all, thanks for being here, even though the festival was canceled. Thank you for being here today. This is, for all of us who are book addicts, this is like nirvana, so thank you. Secondly, if anybody wants to purchase your books in Tucson, they're available at the UA bookstore on the campus at 25% off. And they're available at Barnes & Noble on Broadway.
Okay, can I give you this mic? Actually, let me repeat that for the tape. First, you said thanks for being here, even though the coronavirus is starting to take hold. It's my pleasure to be here. Everybody, no shaking hands. Namaste. But thank you for coming out. And also, because I'm here originally with the notion I was going to be at the Tucson Books Festival, which was canceled, there's bookstores all around Tucson that have my books available for sale, and the University of Arizona Bookstore has them on sale for 25% off right now. And I think that's for everybody who, because of the cancellation of the, so if you want to get a good deal on a book, this is a good weekend for it. Yes. I'll repeat your question.
So I teach writing here, and two things my students struggle with is understanding that they have an audience, and the second thing they struggle with is understanding doing the peer review process, which I call is partially the editing process. So you as an author, do you ever tell us if you envision your audience or not, who you're writing to? And secondly, I'm really curious about how you work with an editor, and what is the good, the bad, the ugly about working with editors.
Okay.
I want to share this with my students.
Okay, the first question is audience. Yes, do I think about my audience when I'm writing? I don't think about a specific audience. I don't think I'm going to try and write this book so that these people will buy it. With that said, there were a couple times when I was writing Nothing More Dangerous, and I might have thrown an F word in there and thought, I don't have to because he could just say hell or something like that. And now, libraries in the Bible Belt won't be banning my books. So I had that, but for the most part, really, what I think about is this. Tolstoy once said that the purpose of any art is to convey to others the deepest feelings of humankind. And that's what I want to do. I think of the audience in terms of, if I write this paragraph this way, what will be the emotional impact of that paragraph? I'm always thinking about the audience in terms of, how do I make them feel? I want to evoke something from you as you read it. I want to engage you as a reader. I don't just want to tell a story. And really, that is so important. That is at the heart of what I do, is that engagement with the reader and evoking something from you. That's when I get an email saying, I just finished your book, there's tears on my cheek, that is the coolest email to get. So I do think of audiences in terms of that, but it's more an aspect of trying to raise my level of craft to evoke emotion. Peer review. So before I became a published author, I was involved in many book groups, writing groups. I would go take these classes at the University of Iowa or the Loft Literary Center, and I would try and find people in the class who I thought could raise my game. And then I'd set up a book group with them, a writing group with them, and then we'd swap chapters and try and make each other a better writer. That's hugely important. Now that I am a published author, I have a paid staff. I have editors to do that. But I still have a cadre of personal friends who read my work. My wife is the first person to read my work. My agent is the second person. I have friends from when I was a practicing lawyer who are big book people, and they will read it at some point. And my editor at the publishing house, I'll be giving my editor my next first draft in July. I'll be giving her another draft in September. And then between September and the end, and probably sometime in next February, we're going to go back and forth, and she's going to say, I think this needs to be changed. I think this is a little weak. This is, over the top. One of the things that Stephen King once wrote that I agree with is, one of the hardest lessons to learn is to trust your editor. With that said, you are the final author. These are your words, your name's on the book. If you disagree and you think my way is better, you should do that, but make sure you understand writing well enough that your decision to do that is based on experience or knowledge, not just, I love this particular passage here and I don't want to give it up even though it doesn't fit the book. So it is vitally important to get peer review along the path. Yes. Oh, one more thing. Outlining. You must outline. No, there are a lot of authors who make a good living. They don't outline a thing. The biggest difference between writing that book for 20 years and writing a book a year after that is I learned to outline my novels. And that I can make my mistakes when I'm daydreaming about it, as opposed to writing 20,000 words down a tangent and realize it's not a good tangent and have wasted 3 weeks of writing process. So outlining is very important. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you bring a lot of yourself into your books, is that correct? And
Yes.
And if I were to share that second book that you wrote, that's for the 15-year-old, that would be a good picture of your life?
So the question is, do I bring personal stuff to my books? Absolutely, every book. And I do it in different ways. For example, in The Life We Bury, Joe goes to a nursing home to interview this man because he doesn't know anybody in the Twin Cities. I had just moved to the Twin Cities. I transferred from Iowa to Minnesota to finish my degree in journalism. And I got this assignment to interview somebody and write an article about them. I didn't know anybody. So I went to a nursing home I thought I could walk in, maybe someone would sit down, talk to me, and someone did. But that's where the idea for the story came from. In The Life We Bury, there's a scene where he makes snowshoes out of pine boards. I did that when I was snowed in up north one time. In Nothing More Dangerous, I was in my hometown of Jefferson City, Missouri, signing books over Thanksgiving, and one of my best friends who grew up really, really close to me, he came in the store and he was so excited. He says, so that scene where Angus is hitting his leg with that lighter, that was me, right? I said, yeah, that was you. And when we snuck up to the drive-in, that was us, right? He said, yeah, that was us. So there's a lot of little vignettes in this book that are me. But it's not autobiographical. It's just, I feel that there's an authenticity if I use my personal experience. But I will say, there's there are racial slurs, racial comments in this book, racial attitudes. Every one of those came from my experience as a 15-year-old growing up in Missouri. I didn't want to use language that I hadn't heard or even use. So I didn't want people to say, that's not who we were back then. Well, I can honestly say that's who I was back then. The people that I hung around with talked like that. So I think it's important to bring authenticity, to use stuff from your own experience. Yes?
First of all, thank you for sharing your personal story. I think that's so powerful. I'm a former teacher for students and teachers and parents, so thank you for doing that. So my question, oh, I forgot my question. Oh, just a minute, it'll come. I was curious at what point you quit your legal career and started writing full-time.
At what point did I quit my legal career and start writing? So I started writing, like I said, in 1992. So I was writing the entire time I was a lawyer. But it wasn't until the end of 2016 when my books were out there being sold and I was able to make a living off the books that I said, okay, I'm going to do what I love doing, and if they're willing to pay me for it, wonderful. I like practicing law. I think I was a good attorney. There was an excitement to it. However, just sitting there and daydreaming and typing it up and getting paid for it, you can't beat that. You know, most days I'm in my pajamas well into the afternoon. So it's, so 2016, so my first book came out 2014. So at the end of 2016, I closed I had some cases that I worked from home for that year, 2017. And then at the end of 2017, I didn't renew my license. So I'm not even a lawyer anymore. Yes?
I'm curious about the fact that you write from a personal perspective and it's really character-driven. Are there any, way out there, like not in your experience, areas that you'd like to write in or about? Cowboy in Montana, vintner in France?
Yeah, are there stories that I want to tell that are outside of my own personal world or the writing world that I've written so far? Yes, there's one story that's in my head that I won't talk about the details of it, but it is a historical fiction. It is a story that I will write someday. I may not ever get it published, but it's a story that just keeps, like knocking at the door saying, why don't you write my story? It's got nothing to do with any of my other books, but it is a story that I feel I need to write. And so I will write it, whether it gets published, I don't know. But yeah, I've been very fortunate that I've written the stories that I want to write. I've never had an editor or a publisher say, we want you to do these novels and only these novels. I write, and then if it's good enough, people will want to read it, and that's how I look at it. Yes?
Do you have any favorite books and authors that have inspired your work at all?
Do I have favorite books and authors? I do. I go back to when I was in high school and was assigned to read books normally. I became very adept at not reading books because I didn't like to read. So for example, a teacher would say, read chapters 13 through 17 for Tuesday. I would read chapter 13 until I found a very poignant question to ask. Then I'd close the book and forget, because I'd go into class, as soon as we start talking about chapter 13, I'd raise my hand, I would ask my good question. I was golden for the rest of the period. So I didn't read a lot of books in high school or grade school, not even in college, but I did read The Outsiders. And I felt that I was Pony Boy. Everybody who reads that book feels that they are, but I am, really. We had a kegger for 8th grade. I smoked. I was the kid with the record for most punishments. And I still felt like Pony Boy, that there was something about me that people didn't see. So Outsiders was a very important book. Where the Red Fern Grows. When I read that as a young boy, I cried. I didn't know a book could make you cry. And it made me mad that it made me cry. I read it a second time just to prove that I could read it without crying. I couldn't. And I read it, every time I've read that, when I get to that one scene, if you've read it, it's like, here they come. But then when I started studying writing, I went back and I read books that I was supposed to read in high school. To Kill a Mockingbird, by far my favorite book. Just a magnificent example of voice, character, a nice mix of action and plot and character and depth to the story. Barbara Kingsolver, Poisonwood Bible, love that book. More towards my genre, I'm a big fan of Dennis Lehane, Cormac McCarthy, guys who are authors who write in what is considered a genre. At the same time, they write at such an elevated level. Their prose and their story and their characters, it's really, it's a mix of literary and genre that I aspire to achieve as well. No Country for Old Men, it's a thriller, but when you read it, it's like this is so well written. You know, if you took the chase out, I'm sure there'd still be a wonderful story here because it's just so well written. So there's a lot of authors like that I aspire to follow in their footsteps. You?
First up, I want to say, like, it's an honor to talk with you. Like, I barely found out this morning that, like, you were here, and the moment I read The Life We Bury, I was just, like, moved, and, like, I found it so relatable. And, but then my question is, like, any characters from your books, like, who would you think would be your most strongest, not strongest, or what traits do you want to make them that way?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for coming and for the compliment. The question is, which characters in my books do I feel are have strongest traits and which ones are lacking? I think when I first wrote Lila, because she is there in that Life we Bury for a specific purpose, I didn't give her the depth that I wish I had. And so I'm really happy to now write her story and hopefully do justice to that. But beyond that, I can't say that I have any regrets on how I've written any of the other characters necessarily, but I kind of wish I'd given Lila a little more depth in that first novel. Yes?
I already had a question, so I just want to make sure I'm not hogging it. Well, I'd like to throw really a softball at you. I'm not trying to inflame anybody, but I'm just curious from the standpoint of a professional author, what your feeling is about this widespread discussion around cultural appropriation. I mean, as a lifelong fiction lover, I would hate to have everything devolve into a personal memoir.
Yeah.
So, just wonder what your thoughts are about that.
That is nowhere near softball.
Come on.
The question is, what are my thoughts on cultural appropriation? I am very cautious about it. For example, the Shadows, Nothing More Dangerous, sorry. Nothing More Dangerous is a story of racism. I can't tell that story from the perspective of the black family or the black son, Thomas. So when I finished my first draft and I thought it was pretty good, I sent it to a friend of mine who I went to law school with, a woman who's black. And I wanted her perspective and her daughter's perspective as to whether or not I was really doing something wrong in terms of how I portrayed that family. And it may be that I don't go enough in depth on that family in the book because I'm scared of getting accused of that, but at the same time, I think I portrayed them in the book the way I would have whether or not this discussion never occurred. So I am very cautious about that. I'm writing Lila's story. It's a female protagonist. I've never written a female protagonist. There's a reason why I waited this long to step into that water. I have been reading nothing but female authors with female protagonists for the past 2 years because I want to get into that understanding and not make, and I throw in a male author writing a female protagonist every now and again just to see if I can see a difference. And I don't want to make those mistakes. So I have, by design, I have a female editor, I have a female agent, I have a female wife. I will have them all read this and give me their input as to whether or not I'm stepping on toes as I do this, because it's not that I don't think that I should be allowed to, but if I'm going to, I really want to make sure I do my research and that I am not writing it just to sell a book, but I'm writing it because this person has a story to tell and I'm the only one who can tell that story. No one else can tell Lila's story but me because I created her. So there's two sides to the coin.
Great. I encourage you.
Thank you.
Because you've had such like a varied career, like passion, what advice would you give young students still trying to figure out what their passions are?
Okay, the question is, since I've had a varied career with numerous passions, what would I advise young people regarding that? Life is a smorgasbord. Go out and dig in. I think that's actually a line from MAME. I'm not sure, but I heard it when I was in high school, and I thought that's a great idea. So when I got into college, and I'm a theater major, and that falls through, I opened up that catalog of possibilities, and I was just astounded. I could be all these different things going forward with my life. And I studied a lot of things that have nothing to do with journalism because they interested me. And I thought, if I'm reading about Hinduism and that all of a sudden sparks some passion, maybe I'll become an expert in Hindu or geology or memory and cognition, psychology. There's all these things out there that you can delve into when you're in college, especially, that you don't know what your interests are. I didn't know. If you told me in high school that I was going to be a writer when I grew up, I would have laughed at you because I was a terrible student. When I found that report card with my first grade teacher's note on it, I also found my 8th grade teacher's note on my language arts class. She said, in language arts, Allen doesn't pay attention, he doesn't do the work, he doesn't study, he doesn't turn in assignments, and when he does, it's poor quality. It's like, yeah, she nailed me. That's exactly who I was. And so it's just, see life as a smorgasbord. Go out and, the jobs I've told you about, practicing law and drywall and writer, that's just a small portion. I was a singing clown. I worked as a chef in a restaurant. I was a traveling salesman. I put my foot in a lot of different puddles, and it helped me in terms of when I finally found something I was passionate about, I knew this was for me. Yes?
Alan, do you feel that your books have to be read in order in order to appreciate the characters and the character development in them?
Okay, that's a very good question. Should my books be read in order? Every book is written as a standalone. So if you read the books as a standalone, you will hopefully enjoy them just for the fact that it's a book, a well-told story. There are 2 of my books that I think make a lot of sense to read in order, and that's The Heavens May Fall and The Deep Dark Descending. This is books 2 and 3 of that 3-book arc for Max. And the reason that those 2 I think should be read in order is because the last day of The Heavens May Fall is the first day of this book. So what happens in this book leads right into this book. It's not a cliffhanger, but it makes for a more enjoyable read if you read those 2 in order. If you read them all in order, honestly, there's no right order. So I wrote The Life We Bury first. I wrote 4 years later the sequel. If you read those 2, wonderful, you've missed nothing. If you read them as I wrote them, and you go through the Max Rupert 3-book arc, you will see little things happening along the way that advance the characters. Lila coming to work for Bodhi, being in law school. But those aren't necessary to enjoy the book, but if you read them in that order, you will have this little bit deeper understanding of the characters as they go along. With that said, Nothing More Dangerous is a true standalone. You could read it first, you could read it last, you could read it in the middle. If you know who Bodhi Sandon is before you read this, you will see that there's aspects of who he became being formed in this book. Otherwise, if you read this before you read that, you'll read about him in The Heavens May Fall and think, oh, I remember him when he was a kid. And so this one there's no order for this one. Yes?
One thing that I hear over and over from friends who are trying to publish is how hard it is to find an agent, but you make it sound like you didn't really have much trouble with that.
Oh, did I? No. No, that's not true. The question is, did I have trouble getting an agent? I was rejected by 150 agents before I got an agent. I had a list of 172 agents. When I got to that 172nd agent, I was going to put that book aside, focus on the next book I was writing. When that book was finished, I was going to start over and try again. I wanted to be traditionally published, so I was going to hold out until I got an agent, whether it took me 3 books, 5 books, 8 books, whatever. I was going to just keep trying to grow as a writer until I wrote something good enough that an agent would say, yeah, I think we can publish this and make some, get some market share on it. So, and that's what they're looking at. Agents look at, yeah, wonderfully written, great evocative prose, but who's going to buy it? If they don't buy it, I can't put my kid through college. So on the other hand, a lot of times it is that unusual book that breaks through. Life of Barry was not a normal book. That was one of the reasons why it was being rejected. It told the story of this college kid who was running away from home and his autistic brother. It was a very character-driven story. At the same time, there was this whole Vietnam story to it and this murder, and it didn't fit well within the mystery shelf. There was actually one of the rejections I got said, we're not actually sure how we would market this. Is it a mystery? Is it a coming-of-age story? Is it a thriller? Is it a literary novel? And it didn't fit neatly into a pattern. However, once it got published, that difference became its strength, I think. So it is not easy to get an agent. All you can do is keep trying. I can give you no advice on how to get an agent because I didn't do it right, apparently, because I got rejected by so many for a book that ended up selling in 26 languages now. So. Any other questions? Yeah, 2 questions. Go ahead.
Carl in The Life We Bury, was he in your life?
Did Carl from The Life of Barry come from someone specific? No. As I was studying about writing and storytelling, one of the books I first read was The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, a treatise on storytelling. And he talked about the importance of a mentor character in so many stories. And I thought, I'm going to add a mentor character to this story. That's how he was born. Now, the fact that he was a Vietnam vet, that might come from my own experience. I hung sheetrock with a guy who was a door gunner and a chopper at one point. My next door neighbor when I was growing up came home from Vietnam and refused to talk about it. So there were aspects about the Vietnam War that intrigued me, and so I think I was drawn to make Carl a Vietnam vet because of that. But he doesn't come from any specific person in my life, no.
I think it's so cool how you're able to write so many of these books, but I'm just curious, was there ever a time where you struggled with writer's block?
Do I ever struggle with writer's block? I go back to outlining. I don't really struggle with writer's block because before I sit down to write, I have the entire novel laid out in a sketchbook. From opening to closing, I know how it's going to end. I know the character arcs. I know the subplot arcs. And I have thought about this story for months, usually years, before I sit down to write it. So by the time I've written it, I have thought it through enough times that I know what's coming next. I will sometimes have a problem with, okay, how do I transition from this scene to this scene? And my first attempt, it seems awkward. I'll just go for a walk with my dogs, go for a run, do something to take that out of my head, because if I sit there and think about it, that'll block me up. So if I just walk away from it and say, okay, I'll just walk the dogs and think about it as I'm walking the dogs, it comes to me. By the time I'm done walking the dogs, I'll go down and write that transition. But really, because I outline, I do not have issues with writer's block. Well, I think we are at the end of our time. I want to thank you all for coming out. This has been a pleasure. It's been a joy. I don't have any books here to sign, but if anybody has brought books, I'd be happy to sign them. Thank you again.